Я не могу базарить в Инстаграме. Они скринят, переписки шлют. Знаешь, я больше не могу сидеть в окне. С тех пор, как стали пасти меня.
Это фул хуйня, если честно, блядь. Просто хуета. Вот сама музыка.
Кого ты видишь рядом, когда не рядом я? Твои слова любителю на два. Мне жаль, ты что сейчас рядом. Ты будешь снова завтра, когда растает твой последний бокал. Сколько стоит эта любовь, если она тебя?
Где мы закончили последний раз?
Останусь в сердце и скину оттуда якоря. Слишком много хочешь, но я даже не твоя. Она в тут с любовью, в айфоне
Кандидатов много. Бали, Бодрум и Кому. Разгоны. Даже на коже.
Хотел вдвоем этот день встречать. Ты контракт, твоя печать. Ты не спишь же третий час. Со мной путирую лишь новый газ. Я долго думал, нельзя. Но мне свое поменял. Мне кажется, это глаза. А может быть, это твой лицо. Резюме дизайнер.
Но фоток ног Стамбула.
Ламбо уехал на месяц, но никто не вернулся оттуда. Отель все блин 5 звезд. Холодной ночью уюта. Детка, я такой же, как ты. Оставь легенду ублюдкам. Я шалава такая, как ты. Нужен фикснешь допамине. Бог дал час, сказал бери. Бог дал час, сказал бери. Такая шалава, как ты. Нужен фикснешь допамине. Бог дал час, сказал бери. Бог дал час, сказал бери. Кого ты видишь рядом, когда не рядом я? Твои слова любителю на два. Мне жаль, ты что сейчас рядом. Ты будешь снова завтра, когда растает твой последний бокал. Сколько стоит это?
Ты не нужен. Иди нахуй. Сам ты не нужен. Твой еблан нахуй. Всем похуй на твой вроде. Иди нахуй, сделай что-нибудь полезное. Love. Opium. Math is lonely.
Ням! Спрайт кола летит чоп, бигтейси на причем. Складок коньячок, с открытой фанты не кричом. Хэппи мил еще, Сандерс баскет был не в счет. Долгий пыльный час, фургон набит коробками с ланчом. Промокод введи, наши бигкинги портативны. Жирдинеры два пути с булкой или тортильей. Снеки однотипные, все теперь лысы. Ведь чипсы парадигмы, здесь достигли смены парадигмы. Теперь фастфуд многопартийный, глины надавив. Я смотрю в зеркало по типу, ну и обед наворотил. Ты я весь мир бы проглотил, мозг не могу идти.
Этот африканский бодибилдер никогда не посещал стандартные тренажерные залы. Вместо этого он тренируется с использованием самодельных гантелей и даже штанг, изготовленных из бетонных форм. Для достижения такой физической формы ему потребовалось несколько лет настойчивого труда.
Я думал, знаешь, скажу, типа, этот короче, он никогда не был в зале, но, типа, он добился такого тела просто за счет того, что он работал, типа, на том...
И самоотдачи. При виде достижения этого парня и его страсти к тренировкам, многие жители его деревни проявили интерес к фитнесу. Парень стал тренером и начал тренироваться вместе с единомышленниками. Уважение парню за его трудолюбие и дисциплину. Этот африканский бодибилдер, этот человек фотографировал себя.
Сколько зарабатывают твои модераторы? Как к вам попасть? Готов работать 24/7.
Как-то так. То есть мой один модератор получил 700 рублей. Один. И... Да, нет, вот это сильно. Это реально сильно. Это очень сильно, на самом деле. Один из... Давай! Эх ты, сука.
Ладно, эти темки мы пока не палим. Решит. Там
In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you
SQL.
guys about getting information from the database. More specifically, we're going to look at the select keyword, and we're going to look at the different ways that we can ask the database management system to give us some information back. So one of the core tenets of interacting with the database management system.
Мне вообще похуй, как это pronounced. Типа, почему вы ебете мне мозги, как это должно быть pronounced? Pronounce how I want, you know? I don't give a fuck about your, like, shit. Если хотите, чтобы я произносил...
And using SQL is writing these little queries. And a query is essentially just a block of SQL that's designed to ask the database management system for a particular piece of information. And so one of the things that we need to be aware of is that when you're keeping track of, huge amounts of information in a database, you want to be able to grab specific information easily. So let's say that I'm trying to, grab a bunch of students from our little student table right here. Well, imagine that we had like 1 million students stored inside of that table, right? I might not want to just grab every single student. I might want to just grab students who meet a certain condition, or students who, have a certain major, or students with a certain name, right? And we can use SQL queries in order to specify those things. So instead of the relational database management system giving us back all the entries in a specific table, instead it can just give us back very specific entries which meet a certain condition. So we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of doing that stuff. Now, this is actually a huge topic, and it's the topic that we're going to be talking about for most of the rest of the course. So this is going to kind of give you guys an introduction into writing all these little queries. So over here, you'll see that I have this query here, and it's just select star from student. And actually, if you want, you can put this on 2 different lines. A lot of people will do that. So this select keyword is a very special word. And this select keyword is basically...
Вообще какая-то тупая хуйня так делается, не знаю. Типа, вообще, мне кажется, непонятно. Типа, хотя если у вас select from student, вот, тогда понятно. Типа, если это один, то вообще странно выглядит.
Held a relational database management system that we want to get some information from it. So I can say select, and then right next to it, I can specify what information I want to get. Now, so far in this course, we've been using this star or this asterisk. And basically the asterisk means that we want to grab all of the information. But if we wanted, we could specify a specific column. So we can select specific columns of information that we want to get back from the database management system, and then we can say from whichever table. So select star from table could also be read as select every column from the student table. So over here, you'll see when I run this, we get this information down here. So we're getting all of the students in the table. We're getting their student IDs and their names and their majors. If I wanted, I could change the columns up here though. So I could say like name. And now what this will do is it'll select all of the names from the student table. So if I was to run this query, you'll see down here we get just the names. So we have the name, and then it's Jack, Kate, Claire, Jack, and Mike. So these are all of the names that were stored inside of the database. I could also include something else. So I could say name, major, from student, and then down here, when I run this query, you'll see we're getting the students' names and the majors, but we're not getting the student's ID. So we're able to specify which specific columns we want to get back. You could also prepend these with the name of the table. So I could say like student.name and student.major. And sometimes people...
Ё-моё.
We'll do this just because student.name, it's clear which table the name is coming from. And as we write more and more complex queries, that can come in handy more. So for the most part, I'm probably going to be writing them both ways, just depending on the situation, but you could do something like this. We can also order the information that we get back. So here I'm getting the student's name and the student's major from student, and if I wanted, I could order that information. So I could use another command, which is order by, and then over here I can just put the name of the column that I want to order these by. So I could say order by name, and now when I run this, you'll see we get the same results, but they're in alphabetical order based off the name. So we get Claire, Jack, Kate, and Mike. So these are now ordered in alphabetical order. And by default, these are going to be in ascending order, but if you wanted, you could put them in descending order. So you could say DESC, and this stands for descending. So now if I run this, you'll see that all the names get returned in the opposite order. So Claire is all the way at the bottom, and then we go all the way back up to Mike. So you can order by anything. So I could even order by like student I back up to opposite order. So descending. So now if I run this, you'll see that all the names get returned in the opposite order. So Claire is all the way at the bottom, and then we go all the way back up to Mike. So you can order by anything. So I could even order by like student ID. So I'm not returning the student ID. In other words, I'm not getting the student ID up here, but I could still order by it. And so now these are going to be in descending order of student IDs. So actually, why don't we just get all of these now? So I'll just say select all from student. And you'll see now it's ordered in descending order by student ID. It's a little bit clearer, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But I could also get rid of it, or I could just say ASC, which stands for ascending. And now it will order them in ascending order. So you can order by a bunch of different stuff. You can also order by different subcolumns. So I could say like order by, and we'll start with major, and then after that we'll do student ID. So select all from student, order by major, and then student ID. So it's going to order them by major first, and then if there's any of them that have the same major, it'll order them by student ID.
Хотя интересно, я вот в Django всегда применял этот order by применял, а просто по минус ID или по минус created at. Интересно, я вот даже не задумывался, потому что можно и так, и так.
So I'm gonna run this, and you'll see down here, it's ordering everybody by major, so we're getting biology, chemistry, computer science, sociology. In this case, these two students have the same major. They also have the same name too, but their student IDs are different. So the student IDs are now ordered in ascending order, but if I said descending right here, and I run this query, now you'll notice that the biology major with student ID 4 came first and then 1. So it ordered it first by major, and then within that, if they have the same major, it ordered them by student ID. You can specify as many of those as you want. You can also limit the amount of results you're getting. So I could say like select all from student, and then I could say limit, and here I could put like 2. And now what this will do is it'll limit the results I get back to 2. So now, instead of getting all the students back, we only got 2. So if you only want like a specific number of rows back from the table, then you'll only get that. And you can also combine these. So
получается, выдает только... Ну, это типа для пагинации.
So I could also like order them. So I could say order by student ID descending. So now this is going to select all the students, order them by student ID, and only give us 2 of them back. So now when I run this, you'll see we're getting 2 back, and it's ordering them in descending order by student ID. So that can be pretty useful, and that's just another way that you can make these more complex. The final thing that we can do that I'm going to show you guys in this tutorial is filtering. So I could say where. So if you remember in a previous tutorial, we were updating and deleting students, and we wanted to only update or delete specific students where certain conditions were true, and we use this where condition. You can do the same thing for select. So I could say like select all from student where major is equal to biology. And so now this is only going to give us the students who are biology majors. And you can see down here we get back the 2 jacks who are both biology majors. You can do the same thing for chemistry. So let's see if we have any
Ой-ой-ой. Так. Фильтруй, получается. По какому-то признаку.
chemistry majors we do. Looks like Claire is a chemistry major. And if you wanted, we could only return specific columns, like I said. So we could say select, the name and major from student where major is chemistry. And now we're only getting the name and the major back. And you can make these more complex. So I could say like where major is equal to chemistry or major is equal to biology. And so now this will give us all of the chemistry and the biology majors. So we get the 2 jacks and Claire. And we could also do different things. So I can say like where major is equal to chemistry or name is equal to Kate. And so now we'll get back any of those students. So we get back Kate and Claire, and they have different majors. So you can play around with those where statements to get specific entries from the individual table. So I want to talk to you guys about how we can make these wheres a little bit more complex. So obviously over here we're using equals, but there's a bunch of other stuff you could use too. So and this is actually a comment in SQL. So if you put 2 dashes, then anything after it is going to be a comment. But here I have all the different comparison operators. So we have equals. We also have less than, greater than.
Получается, это операторы в SQL. Операторы в SQL. Так. Ну, получается, меньше, больше, меньше, меньше, равно Что же это значит? Я понимаю, это как в Excel. Типа...
Less than or equal to, greater than, equal to, not equal to, which is these less than, greater than signs, and then and or. So you guys have seen some of these, but we could use these. So I could say like major not equal to chemistry. So this is going to select all the students where the major is not equal to chemistry. So if I run this, now we get all the students except Claire because Claire is a chemistry major. Or we could do the same thing for numbers. So I could say like student ID. So select all the students where student ID is less than 3. And we need to get rid of this. So now we'll get all the students who have student IDs. Let me get all of these. So we're only getting students 1 and 2. We're not getting anything. Or we could do less than equal to 3. And now this will also give us that student ID equal to 3. And you can combine these. So like where student ID is less than 3 and name is not equal to Jack. So if we run this now, you'll see we get Kate and Claire, but we don't get Jack, who is student ID number 1, because it didn't fit the condition. So you can use all of these comparison operators to...
Да, у меня ощущение, будто я какую-то хуйню стримлю, да? Угу. Факт.
ID is less than 3.
Так. Тут, как говорится, минутку. Бля. Неудобно получилось. Так.
And we need to get rid of this. So now we'll get all the students who have student IDs, and let me get all of these. So we're only getting students also given.
Ну, блядь,
So,
понятно,
seriously, thing
нахуй.
we can do. So like I'll use Kate or my name is.
Вот это тоже интересно. Это уже намного интереснее, потому что не хуйня. Так, теперь мы это записываем. Так. Получается, что те колонки, где только какой-то параметр из какого-то списка.
Claire, Kate, or Mike. So basically what this is saying is select all from student where the name is in these, like this group of values, right? So if the name is Claire, Kate, or Mike, then it's gonna select that. So now I can click run, and you'll see down here we get all the entries, Kate, Claire, and Mike. So this is a really easy way to compare like one column to a bunch of different values. So like we could check to see if the name is in there. We could also do the same thing for like major. So like where major in biology or chemistry. And now if we run this, you'll see that we get Jack and Claire because they're
Это уже адекватно.
so
Тема.
that's we can use and you can also combine all these things together. So you could say like where major in biology.
Ну, понятно, блин, что you can combine, но он не долбоёбы американские, которые жрут нахуй химозную еду всю жизнь ебаную свою, бесполезную, блядь, сука, и живут нахуй в красивых городах, блядь, с небоскребами, со всей хуйней. А эти долбоёбы, блядь, уже просто с опухшими мозгами, блядь, от хорошей жизни. Просто, блядь, им уже нужно объяснять, нахуй, что если есть какие-то параметры, блядь, то их можно combine.
In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you guys to a more complex database query that we're going to be using for the rest of the course. And so up to this point in the course, we've learned a lot of stuff with SQL. We learned how to create tables, insert data into those tables. We learned about the different data types. We also learned how to update and delete data, and we learned how to query and select data from the database, right? So we learned a lot of the core concepts in SQL. And up to this point, if you guys have been following along, then you have a pretty good fundamental understanding of the different things that we can do in SQL. Now, obviously we didn't cover everything, but we covered a lot of the basics, right? And we've been using this student table, which just has 3 columns, 1 primary key, and we learned how to create this table. We learned how to insert all of this information. We learned how to update and delete, and then also just query for the specific language. Here's the problem though, is this is a very simple example, right? I mean, it's one database table, and it only has 3 different columns. Slim, and so and the student head, and that could have our company database. And you can find this PDF in the description below. I'll put a link to it. But basically, this is the database schema that we're going to be using for the remainder of the course. So this is a more complex database schema, but because it's complex, it's going to give us some awesome opportunities to query it, right? In other words, the more complex the database schema, the more complex. So this, wrap your head around. X space information, D, going to be male or female. Salary, which would be like how much they make. And then over here we have two foreign keys. So the primary key of this table is the employee ID over here, which we have in red. The foreign keys are going to be these keys over here in green. And basically a foreign key is just, it's going to store the primary key of an entry in a different table, right? So we have two foreign keys. The first here is super ID. That stands for supervisor ID. So an employee in our company is going to be able to
B
have
for
a supervisor.
бедолага.
And a supervisor is actually going to be another
Если
employee.
что.
So super ID is going to point to another employee in the employee table. We also have branch ID. So different employees in the company are going to be able to work for different branches. And you'll see down here, we have this branch table, and it just has a branch ID, a name, and then also some other stuff, which we'll talk about. So an employee can work at a branch, right? And that's kind of what we're storing over here. So let's take a look at this. We would say that the employee Michael Scott, his super ID is 100. That means Michael Scott's supervisor has an ID of 100. So Michael Scott's supervisor is going to be David Wallace, right? Because David Wallace has an employee ID of 100. Branch has an ID to branch. Has ID, which is Mary branch supplier name. Employee client. This into more complex database schema in SQL. So in the last tutorial, I showed you guys this database over here.
Бля, ну это, сука, ебаные туториалы американцев. Они сделаны просто для таких же тупых ебланов, блядь. Ну ладно, не для тупых ебланов, я хуйню говорю, это высокомерие, и так нельзя говорить. Просто, блядь, я уже знаю, нахуй, всю эту хуйню, блядь, от Джанга, все это и так понимаю. Просто, блядь, мне нужны эти ебаные SQL команды для получения теорема, чтобы нормально все делать по красоте. А, как бы, блядь, просто...
Database. This is basically just an example database that I created, and it's a database that
Angela
we're going to be using
Margella.
for the remainder of the course in order to learn a little bit more advanced SQL querying and stuff like that. So this is a company database, and we have a bunch of tables like this employee table, branch table, works with table, etc. And in the last video, I kind of talked about what each of those did. We looked at some of the different relationships between the tables. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how we can actually, we're going to delete all that way. We can use that. I'm going to student table we had looked at before. And before we get started, I just want to say all of the code that I'm going to be using in this, and I'll have all of this, so thing in a bunch. I'm going to drop that student table. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop table student, and we'll go ahead and drop that table. That way we don't have to worry about it.
Да,
So
в
once
принципе,
we've gone ahead
прикольно
and
выглядишь,
dropped the
если
student
капсуль
table, now
пишет,
we can
прикольно.
start creating all of these tables for our company database. So I'm just basically going to paste in the code for creating each of these tables. I already have it all written out, and I'll kind of walk you guys through what it is and what we're doing. So here we have create table employee. So we're going to create this employee table. We have our employee ID, which is an integer, and this is going to be the primary key of the table. And then we also have first name, last name, birthday. So birthday is actually a date, as you can see over here. We haven't used the date data type yet, but we're using it now. Date will allow us to store a date just like this with a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and a 2-digit day. We're also storing their sex, so like male or female, and that's just a varchar 1. We're storing the salary, and then we're also storing the supervisor ID and the branch ID. And if you guys remember from the last video, the supervisor ID is a foreign key which points to another employee. And the branch ID is also a foreign key which points to the branch table. Now, here's the thing, we can't actually make these foreign keys just yet because the employee table doesn't technically
Наш секс. Жесткий секс.
exist yet, and the branch table doesn't technically exist yet because I haven't created them. And so I can't define these guys as foreign keys just yet. We're going to do that later, and we'll add that in afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll create the employee table just like that. So now we're going to go ahead and create the branch table. So I have the code for the branch table right here. So we're going to create table branch, and this is just this guy down here. So it has a branch ID, which is the primary key, branch name, and the manager ID. So remember, the manager ID is down here in green. The manager ID is also a foreign key. So the manager ID we're actually going to be defining as a foreign key, which points to the employee table, and then we have the manager start date, which is a date. So down here, I'm defining a foreign key. So in order to create a foreign key, I can just say
МГР ID это типа ID мигранта какого-то. Так, foreign key. Так, migrant ID. References. Employee ID. Ну, on delete, понятно.
foreign key, and then inside of parentheses, put the name of the column that I want to be the foreign key. In our case, it's manager ID, and then I can say that it references employee, and then inside parentheses, just the name of the column in the employee table, which is going to be employee underscore ID. And then finally, I'm going to do one more thing, which is over here, I'm going to say on delete set null. And we're going to talk more about what on delete set null does in a future video, but for now, just know that whenever we're creating a foreign key, we're going to put on delete set null, or we could also put something called on delete cascade, which again...
Да, вот я на Cascade использую просто, чтобы удалило все нахуй, чтобы не
I'm going
было
to talk about in a
ошибок.
future video, but just put that in there, and that'll make it a lot easier for us to manage this foreign key. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll create the branch table. So looks like that went well. All right, so
Так, стоп.
next thing we need to do and run that easier cascade, which again I'm going to talk about in a future video.
И что не так? Он delete set null. Понятно. Как будто он вообще это подгружает из базы слишком долго, вообще странная хрень. Так. Ага, понятно.
Set null. And we're going to talk more about what on deleting a cascade for us to manage this.
Сейчас запишем это говно. Move. Там была, но не там мака. Тим. Поле. Которое мы хотим сделать. И здесь по стандарту table name.
Foreign key. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll create the branch table. So looks like that went well. All right, so next thing we need to do is we need to set the super ID and the branch ID of the employee table as foreign keys. So remember, down here in the branch table, we set the manager ID as a foreign key, but we weren't able to do that with the supervisor ID or the branch ID in the employee table because the branch table and the employee table haven't been created yet. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do that. So down here I have two little blocks of SQL code. The first one is altering the table employee, and I'm just saying add foreign key, and then inside of parentheses we're putting branch ID.
Так, что это получается? Alter, table, employee, add foreign key, branch ID, references branch ID. On delete set null. Ну понятно, мы создаем foreign key branch ID, который равняется на branch in, короче, самому. Это вообще странная тема, типа мы создаем перемену же, с которой есть такое имя, и мы опираем ее на саму себя же. А, ну это как переназначение в питоне, все, я понял, переназначение. Почему-то, когда я говорю, что типа как в питоне, чувствую себя тупым. Ну, потому что питон язык для самых конченых даунов. Таких как я, например. Super ID.
So that's going to be the foreign key.
У нас branch ID, он к branch относится, а super ID. Что такое super ID?
References branch and then branch underscore ID and on delete.
Super ID, оно относится у нас к... Странно. А к самому себе оно относится, что ли?
We're going to set null. And so what this is going to do is it's going to add branch ID as a foreign key to the employee table. So I'm going to run this, and now this is going to be a foreign key. And then down here we can do the same thing, but for supervisor ID. So you see supervisor ID right there. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and this will add the supervisor ID as a foreign key, just like we did with the branch ID. So we needed to do that because when we created the employee table, the branch table and the employee table hadn't been created yet, so we couldn't add them as foreign key relationships. All right, so now we're going to add the client table. So you'll see over here, create table client, and we're just storing the client ID as a primary key, client name, branch ID, and then we're going to make the...
Я ничего не проворонил. Нет, ничего, все нормально. Так, теперь мы создаем табличку. Клиент. Это уже интереснее, чем слушать фигню по кучу лет. Хотя бы делом займусь, как говорится, бранч. Как будто бы мы... да, мы делали... Короче, нормально все. Понятно, тут мы опять все, блядь, ебать, еблан. Это мы не переназначаем, это мы просто создаем foreign key. Это прям, блядь, какой же я дебил. Ладно, не дебил, все нормально, не дурак, все хорошо. Delete set null. Понятно. Короче, мы сначала создаем его в виде инта, потом branch ID, мы
So you'll see over here, create table client, and we're just storing the client ID as a primary key, client name, branch ID, and then we're going to make the branch ID a foreign key. So over here on the client table, you'll see that the branch ID is a foreign key. It points over to branch. So we're going to define that relationship here. I'm just saying foreign key branch ID references branch ID, and then once again, we're just going to say on delete set null. So let's go ahead and create the client table. I'm just going to run this, and that'll create the client table. So next we have the works with table. So the works with table is actually pretty unique because it has a composite primary key. So the primary key has the employee ID and the client ID. And actually what's unique is that each component of the primary key is a foreign key. So employee ID is a foreign key and client ID is a foreign key. And so over here, we can create this table. I just have employee ID, client ID, total sales. The primary key is employee ID and client ID.
Так, стоп, я что-то заболтал меня этот америкос. Так, это нужно заранить у нас.
This table, he has the unique client table as a client ID. So employee ID is a foreign key and client total sales. The primary key is
Какой-то много foreign key. Я вот и думаю, знаете, вот у него эта схема дебишки. Я думаю, как бы выглядела схема вот каких-нибудь моих дебишек того же Ленга. Это же вообще пиздец, там вообще была бы жесть. Это так обидно, что Ленг... Где мы перезначаем форанки? Точнее, не перезначаем, а назначаем форанки. Блин, так обидно, что никому нахуй не нужен мой Ленг. Это реально обидно. Мы что, одновременно такое, да? Прикол. Так. Что за прога? DB Viewer не пробовал, вообще пробовал DB Viewer. У меня даже он установлен, DB Viewer. Но я не знаю, если честно, не шарю, я его скачал. Качал этот DB Viewer, но, скажу честно, не пробовал ни разу. У меня стоит на компьютере, я, типа, блядь, даже не знаю, как им пользоваться, в общем. Я думал, что DB Viewer только для просмотра базы данных. А там, оказывается, еще, видимо, можно инсертить данные и работать вообще прям с бэшкой. Я думал, это только для просмотра. Вообще, видимо, я дурак. Но если прога, я не знаю, мне она самому не нравится, она, конечно, красивая. Я просто по курсу пробовал, просто по курсу, поэтому сорян, типа, реально немножко дебил. Не, типа, если она реально, типа, если там можно писать в ней SQL код, я реально перейду. Потому что эта хуйня лимитируется на 100 строчек, и я просто по курсу делаю. Я, если честно, пока не очень хорошо в этих SQL движухах разбираюсь, потому что всю как бы свою жизнь пишу, ну ладно, не жизнь, но, блядь, последние 1,5 года изучаю Django, и там эти все команды, они, в принципе, через Python. А сейчас я хочу выучить Django RM, чтобы делать более оптимизированные и быстрые запросы. Поэтому вот начал изучать SQL, и вот как бы не сталкивался с тем, что даже особо базу данных просматривать нужно. Все как бы через команды в Python. Поэтому, в общем, я пока новичок в SQL движухах.
is employee ID and client ID, and then the foreign keys are employee ID and client ID. And you'll notice over here, instead of saying on delete set null, I'm saying on delete cascade.
Ну, это
And again, I'm
понятно,
going to
то,
talk
что
more about on delete set null and
делить
on delete
каскейт, это
cascade.
там просто тут это все связано. Это что самая нормальная тема, чтобы потом не было неудобных ситуаций. Скрипты можно писать, открывать базы, редактировать, все можно, короче. Блин, большое спасибо, реально. У меня он скачан, ни разу не открывал, честно, ни разу не открывал. Просто мне его, типа, ну, слышал тоже, скачал, ну, как ты знаешь, скачал и забил. Часто такое бывает у меня. В общем, спасибо большое за рекомендацию. Буду пользоваться. Я думаю, прям со следующего стрима. Я просто этот стрим уже думаю скоро заканчивать, а так, блин, спасибо большое, спасибо большое.
In a future video,
Спасибо
but
большое,
for now, just
Томик.
know that you need to have this here in order for everything to kind of be set up correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and run this.
Короче, если что, вот я еще пишу тут файлик такой, конспект по этой темке. Поэтому, блин, не знаю, вот думаю, потом залью ролик на YouTube сделаю, типа как я учил SQL, пытался выучить. И думаю, может создать канал, выложить этот файлик туда. Хз.
And we'll be able to insert or create the works with table. And
Такие
then
планы.
finally, we're going to create our last table, which is the branch
Что
supplier
за файлик? Так,
table. And then finally, we're going to create our
так. EMP ID есть, клиент ID есть, в чем проблема? А primary key, а не foreign key. Дебил, то-то я и думал, что не так? А что не так? You may have error. Запятая. Delete cascade. Может здесь нужна какая-то движуха. Что не так-то? Right. Все, понятно. Понятно, что не так. Нет. Missing column client ID, а вот же client ID. Клиент ID, что не так? Клиент ID. Сторона движуха. References employee и employee ID. И employee. Так, client. Так. Вот тут где-то создавал табличку с client. Client. Бля. Да. Пиздец. Client ID. Бля. Короче, нужно, получается, это нужно закомментировать. Сейчас drop table client. Теперь create table client ID. Теперь это мы анкомментируем. И все, заебись. Так, я только сажусь в DZ по SQL. А сейчас ОРМ как раз с праздником. Good night. Блин, тебя тоже с праздником. Праздник, я считаю, общий. Считаю, праздник общий для мужчин и женщин. Поздравляйте всех своих женщин, которых любите. Девушек. Всех. А что за DZ по SQL? Ты где-то учишься по SQL или что ты? Какой-то код будущего? Код будущего, SQL, я не знаю. Что за DZ по SQL? Ты где вообще? Ты в университете каком-то или что? Что за DZ по SQL? Хотя ты, наверное, уже ушел? Ну ладно. Если ты тут, напиши, что за DZ по SQL. Где даю домашку по SQL?
The last table, which is the branch supplier table. And this is actually kind of similar to the
Методология. Какой-то курс. Ну круто, что желаю. Удачи тебе. Желаю удачи в изучении. Как бы надеюсь, кому-то поможет это. Надеюсь, ну как бы приятно, что смотришь. Ну, короче, ладно, последняя таблица осталась.
works with table. So down here we have the branch supplier table. It also has a composite key, so that key is made up of multiple columns. And the branch ID column is a foreign key, but the supplier name column isn't a foreign key. So this one's actually pretty interesting as well. So we have branch ID, supplier names, supply type, and then the primary key is branch ID and supplier name, and the foreign key is just branch ID. And again, with this one, on the foreign key, that's also part of the primary key, I'm just saying on delete cascade. So that's going to be what we're going to need there. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and you'll see over here that everything got entered in correctly. So now we have all of these tables created, right? We created all of the tables for our database schema. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to actually insert information into those tables. Now, when we're inserting information into these tables, because we have all of these like foreign key relationships, we're actually going to have to do it a specific way. And so I'm going to walk you guys through how we might do something like this, and it'll give you an idea of how you could do it. So I'm actually going to make the text a little bit smaller. So over here, I'm going to show you guys how we could insert all of the information for the corporate branch. So inserting the employee and the branch entries for the corporate branch. Now, you'll notice over here that the employee table and the branch table have foreign keys that point to each other. So the employee table has an entry over here, branch ID, which points to the branch or points to a specific branch. And each branch has a column here, manager ID, which points to a specific employee. So there's like this circular relationship. So when we're inserting these elements, we're going to have to do it in a specific order. So over here, I'm just starting with, like I said, the corporate branch. So I'm inserting into the employee table values 100, David Wallace. So I'm inserting in this David Wallace row over here. And you'll notice that I put all this stuff in here. But when I get to branch ID, which is this last element over here, it should be 1, right? So David Wallace should belong to the corporate branch. But the problem is that the corporate branch hasn't been created yet. So I'm just going to set this equal to null because that branch hasn't been created yet. And I'm going to go ahead and insert David Wallace in there. So I'm just going to run this. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the branch into the branch table. So I'm inserting into the branch table values 1, corporate, 100. So now that since I already inserted the David Wallace employee, I can set David Wallace's employee ID as the manager ID on the branch row. And so now I'm inserting in the corporate branch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then what I need to do now is I need to update that David Wallace entry to say that he works for the corporate branch, right? So down here I'm saying update employee, set branch ID equal to 1, where employee ID is equal to 100. So that'll go ahead and update David Wallace. So the last thing we're going to do now is just insert the last employee into the corporate branch. So you'll see Jan Levinson is actually getting inserted into there. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And so now we have all of our employees inserted into the corporate Dan Levinson is actually getting inserted into there. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this. And so now we have all of our employees inserted into the corporate branch. I'm gonna do the same thing for the other branches. So we'll do the same thing for the Scranton branch. And here I have the code to do that. So again, I'm inserting in the manager of the Scranton branch. So I'm doing that right now, which is Michael Scott. Then I'm inserting the actual Scranton branch. And then I'm updating Michael Scott to say that he works at the Scranton branch. And then finally, I'm adding in Angela. Then I'm updating Michael Scott to the same thing for the Stanford Literally. So now I have a branch. And I'm inserting the actual Scranton branch. The manager of the Scranton branch. So I'm doing that right now, which is Michael Scott. Then I'm inserting the actual Scranton branch. Then I'm updating Michael Scott to say that he works at the Scranton branch. And then finally, I'm adding in Angela, Kelly, and I'm also adding in Stanley. So now I have all of the employees in the Scranton branch. And again, we have to do it that way because we have this like circular relationship with the foreign keys between the employee and the branch table. So then finally, we're doing the same thing for the Stanford branch. So I'm inserting the manager of the Stanford branch, and then I'm inserting the actual Stanford branch, and then I'm updating the manager of the Stanford branch to say that he works at the Stanford branch, and then I'm adding in these other employees, so Andy Bernard and Jim Halbert. All right, so now that we've done all that stuff with the employee table and the branch table, we can kind of move on to doing the other ones, and hopefully that shows you how you might insert the student table. The most complex inserting. We're going to intern just like this. All right, so I've gone ahead and ran each one of these insert statements. So we inserted everything into the branch supplier table. Now I'm going to insert everything into the client table. And again, this information is just the information that you see over here. It's just written out into the works with table. So again, this is just a bunch of, numbers and stuff like that. All right, so now we've gone ahead and populated all of these database tables with all the information. So why don't we check it out? I'm going to say select all from employees. So let's see all the different employees that we had, make sure everything worked. So down here, you'll see that we have all these different employees. We can do the same thing for like works all of how out of my query the company